Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the TF Podcast, where we discuss technology and finance with startup individuals and those changing the world and doing some interesting things. I'm really interested for my next guest, guests as in plural, Tim Wagner and Shruthi Rao. They're the founders of Vendia. They just raised just a little over $5 million to do some really interesting things in blockchain on the infrastructure side, and I think that's definitely needed. So excited to talk to both of you about that. Who wants to go first on the introductions?
I can kick us off. Tim Wagner. Folks might know me for my work at AWS. Was there for almost 6 years. Started what became eventually AWS Lambda and the serverless parts of that company's portfolio. And then left there to go down to the Bay Area and spent some time at Coinbase, where I was the VP of engineering. Now we're doing our startup, Vendia, and you can kind of think of it as some ways as kind of the child of these two different ideas, kind of the best of the cloud and serverless and the best of kind of blockchain and distributed ledgers.
Excellent.
And I'm Shruthi Rao. I am the co-founder of Vendia along with Tim Wagner. And before this, I was the head of business development for blockchain on AWS, where I launched Amazon Managed Blockchain and Quantum Ledger Database. What I found at AWS running blockchain business for a couple of years was enterprises don't really have a trust problem. What they do have is a dispersed data problem. Their data is everywhere. Some of them are with their partners. Some of them are in other clouds, sometimes on-prem. Some of these partners, desktop PC or just a cell phone is usually their IT for them. And
Sure.
They didn't have access to this data. So that's what we are looking to solve using blockchain-inspired serverless platform at Vendia.
Yeah, super interesting. Yeah, I mean, I can definitely relate where the information is siloed on different, whether that be a device or a system or software or even cloud instance, it's just really just everywhere. Totally. Well, before we kind of dig into that real quick, let's just get a little bit about kind of the background for both of you. And I know you said most recently, did you two meet at AWS or in Amazon before, or how did you two meet?
We did. We have our mutual origin story kind of starts with I was running Lambda, and one of our big challenges was we were seeing some great product market fit and had some great business success. But we really needed to take it to a larger number of customers and improve our selling strategies, top-down motion, partner programs, and the like. So we knew we had this big business challenge ahead of us. And so I was like, where are we going to find some fantastic business partners to come help us drive that? And so Shruthi walked in the door, and we actually met at her interview at AWS.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was a really very cool story. Here I go, and an AWS loop, as Amazonians call it. The interview, it's a 6-hour interview in person, and here I meet Tim Wagner. I was just excited to go meet him, and the first question that I had for him was, before we even started the interview, was, why isn't anyone using serverless for blockchain? It makes complete sense. It's pay as you go. It's all trigger based. You don't have to rent anything. It scales up or down. It makes complete sense. So why isn't anyone using serverless for blockchain workloads? And that was when, I think we completely bonded over that. He liked me enough to hire me to the role, so all is well. And I think that was the beginning of our Vendia journey together, of marrying these two concepts together and coming up with a peanut butter and jelly strategy.
Sure.
And here we finally are together doing that.
Nice. Well, that's great. So, let's break that down a little bit, right? So one of the big issues with just blockchain in general is particularly like in an enterprise context or an enterprise environment, is the selling points or the selling tools that you might hear an ICO company talk about don't really reflect the needs of a enterprise technology, right? In the sense of this whole distribution as well as decentralization of information, or making data available to people that maybe don't need access to it, or regardless of how encrypted it might be. They're just things that don't necessarily jive well with an enterprise. And at the end of the day, like Tim, you've built lots of software. It's all about solving requirements, right? Like, what are the business requirements that you're solving through technology? And I'd love to just let's anchor the conversation there for a second, just in how the enterprise might think of blockchain. Because really, maybe it is, or kind of a conversation I've had with people is like, well, maybe it's not technically blockchain, but it doesn't matter as long as it's using the elements that are needed to solve the requirements of the business, right? Love if either of you want to jump in on that.
Yeah, I know that Shruthi has sat at kind of this impedance mismatch for a while. Why don't you go first, and then I can add some of my reflections.
Yeah, definitely. So look, this is a very near and dear topic to me. At AWS, I met personally with 1,092 unique customers and enterprise customers. So there's some kind of a data point I have on this. So when I talk to the customers who wanted to use blockchain, whether it's QLDB or Amazon managed blockchain, the use case usually was, look, we've made these IoT, AIM, and AIML investments, IoT edge investments on one side that are creating massive amounts of data. This data is in many of our partners, and we would like to get intelligence from these devices. On the flip side, we've also made AI and ML and analytics investments to run all of this data, except this data is being produced in our partners' ecosystem, and we have no way to access that. In fact, the customers only have access to about 20% of the data. So, AI ML is garbage in, garbage out. So given that they're only piping 20% of the data into these AI ML analytic solutions, they're getting partial data. At the same time, these companies also don't have a mechanism to use the intelligence they're creating back into the edge in real time when they can influence the decision of their partners. So even if they are getting somewhat intelligent, it's not autonomous, whether it's a supply chain or some kind of a forecasting, demand planning. Nothing is in real time, not even in near real time. So that was a problem. But let's come back to, blockchain hasn't resonated with enterprises. Let's look at why that is. If you look at a public network, blockchain public network, I don't know in a public, let's say a Bitcoin blockchain, if I'm talking to Jonathan or a nefarious bot who wants to take my money and run. So I require that you prove to me in a Byzantine fault tolerant way that you're indeed a human being who is legally interacting with me, not a bot. So you would have to own your own data for that. Right. And in order for you to own your own data, you would have to own your own server, compute, capacity, databases. In essence, you have to run your own node. Now, enterprises don't have a trust problem. They have a dispersed data problem. They have trust established through legal contracts, which is not the same thing as, a smart contract. They don't need a smart contract to do that. It's a nice to have, but that's not the main problem here. So then now you're requiring every single party in an enterprise use case to own their own node because You're taking the thesis of solving for trust instead of solving for a dispersed data problem. That means a truck driver and a farmer and a distribution center will have to start spinning up their own Kubernetes cluster and install blockchain consensus protocols on it, which is ludicrous to ask for. So fundamentally, all of the legacy blockchains are solving for the wrong problem for enterprises. And that's in your own words, when you talk to over 1,000 customers, it starts to be apparent that what they need to be solved. Yeah. And that's when Tim and I work backwards from that.
Yeah. So one of the things that's kind of funny is you go talk to an enterprise, right? And in contrast to talking to someone who's thinking, crypto and ICOs and kind of that, all of that parlance, the first questions out of an enterprise, CTO's mouth are going to be, how do I restrict visibility of the data and how do I delete the data, right? Like PII, GDPR compliance, right? Like that's the kind of thing that's top of mind, and it flies in the face of some of the more, call it maybe more religious tenets of maybe a classic way in which blockchains have been approached. So what we did was we were really inspired by the part of this vision that does resonate, this idea of replicated data, of symmetric transparency and visibility of data, that the fact that the ledger, the provenance, the ownership, how you got to the state that you're in matters as much as the current state. Those all resonate with the enterprise. They're all very real. They're all very powerful and important concepts that distributed ledgers got right. And our job is, how do we kind of harvest the best of those capabilities and give them to the enterprise in some, in this consumable form?
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. And what's interesting when you say all that is, sometimes people think it's weird that, like, well, how can you be so bullish about Bitcoin as a cryptocurrency and a blockchain, but then also enterprise, for me personally, like, and then also enterprise blockchain? And I'm like, well, because I think of myself as a technologist and a business person. And so if you're solving a business need, right, then the whole thing, all technology is finding the best pieces of things that other people have created and making it better, and then putting your own spin on it, right? At the end of the day, it's like everything is a build off of something else. And so, I think the Bitcoin use case makes a lot of sense, in the self-sovereign money management aspect of it, like kind of like Shruthi was talking about. Like, hey, like if you want to be in charge of your own data and be in charge of your own money, that makes perfect sense. But like you're both saying, is in a enterprise business context, that would be well too cumbersome to achieve. And for the most part, you want to keep your information inside of your network, whether that be within your company or the network of participants that interact with your company, right? So yeah, super interesting there.
Yeah, and look, there's still this huge there's still this huge intersection between those two needs. You don't necessarily need that full degree of complete self-sovereignty, at every individual transaction level within the enterprise, but you absolutely get this flavor of that challenge where, if you and I are different companies, we each have to individually comply with regulations. Neither of us can do that by proxy with the other, which means each of us needs our own copy of critical data. Each of us has to be responsible for our system. So the decentralization mechanisms absolutely resonate with enterprises, right? Because that's the world they live in, right? So that part of it is very much true. But you have to give it to them in a pattern that is, that makes integration easy, that is friendly with the public cloud, that supports the things they have to do, like remove access to data over time, and obviously deliver things like data governance in a way that's easy, fast, and fun for them to do, as opposed to sort of a single, preset form of that, which might not be the most readily accessible part of it for an enterprise.
Yeah.
There are some features of blockchain that are very interesting even to an enterprise, right? Like maintaining a lineage and history of all of the transactions that has happened. So your world state is very interesting. Not in that every single transaction should be notated on the world state and every single party on the chain needs to have access to that. That's not the tenet, but it's more of, there are 5 parties sharing data with each other. Party 1 should not be able to see the pricing data of party 2, and that's the abstraction that they want to maintain. Now you want to have a log. Party 1 needs to be able to see a log of every single transaction that, or party that has accessed certain type of data that they're putting into a network to be shared. So maybe they want to see if there is a particular user within their own space that is trying to do some of the activities that they're not supposed to do. So maybe that's the immutable log that they need. We see multiple customers that we are working with in our early customers saying, look, we want to have everyone to have access of the logs of who's accessed what, when, why, and how, so that we know that our data, each one of our data, is secure and we're not giving it away without monetizing it. But at the same time, we want to be able to share intelligence, because shared knowledge gives us, 360-degree view of the data. So it's still using the main tenets of blockchain, but not in a religious form, the way it's prescribed, that everyone gets to see everything. Sure.
Yeah. So I mean, I think that's a very interesting point, and it makes a lot of sense. It's funny because we've definitely have evolved in how enterprises thought through blockchain, and call it the articulation, where it used to be everything was blockchain everything, and now almost sometimes people are even less likely to mention blockchain because they don't want to be confused with something else. So, you know, you were both recently fundraising. I'm curious how those conversations went and how you articulated what you'd be working on from a fundraising perspective. And like, if, you know, because I know that you both have been in the space for a while. You know, in 2017, people would always say like, we're a blockchain company for X, or we're doing blockchain things. And it seems like now people just say like, we're this great company and we happen to be leveraging this technology. So curious how that went for both of you.
Yeah, you're seeing us both chuckle here a little bit because, you know, there's definitely a bit of a blockchain and crypto hangover, right, in among some of the investment community. And this is one of the things that we honestly, you know, we really wrestled with this. Because you'd find some investors who actually liked the space. They wanted us to own that marketing message and that, you know, that category in which we were participating here, and they felt the term added a lot of value. And then you also got some who were just, you know, the whole once bitten, twice shy challenge, right? Where they like, if you use the B word, that was kind of game over on the conversation. Yeah. So there was definitely a mixture of responses to that. The one thing that everybody resonated with when, you know, in our conversations was that we are first and foremost a cloud infrastructure company. We're trying to solve things like track and trace problems in supply chains, virtual data lake construction challenges, so companies can easily share and use data more effectively. And so that's what we led with. And then, you know, kind of the 2 or 3 slides into that, what you start talking to them about is like, well, how are people doing that today? What are some of the incumbent strategies, like perhaps Hyperledger Fabric or APIs? And then it becomes a more natural and organic part of the conversation to say, well, yes, blockchains offer a certain way of doing this. They also have certain limitations. We took some of the best of that technology and those ideas, and then here's what we added into that to make our strategy. But certainly, I know, you know, Shruthi and I had a lot of late nights trying to decide, do we use the B word here? Do we call it a distributed ledger? How exactly to talk about that, you know, to avoid confusion and maybe misperception of what we were working on.
You know, I'll add this to what Tim said. It's totally, we definitely still refer to it jokingly as the B word and try to avoid it. But I'll say this, leading with the problem was the most effective way for us, not leading with the technology, because really technology is the driver here. But the problem is this dispersed data problem. That when we started talking to our investors about, look, companies are on multiple clouds and on-prem, and some of them don't have a cloud. They have a desktop PC or a phone, and data is everywhere. And when we started talking about these trends and headwinds, especially migration towards autonomous everything, smart cities, that's where the world is headed toward. And for that, the currency is really data. And how we positioned ourselves was, you know, quote unquote plumbing, that we were bringing in this data from everywhere to one or multiple places. So you could do something with that data fast and low cost. So that resonated more than what kind of interesting technology we use under the hood. We happen to be inspired by blockchain, and it runs serverlessly. That's interesting. It's an implementation thing. So we're not a blockchain company. We're a dispersed data solving company that happens to use blockchain tenets with serverless architecture. So
right.
that was the resonance.
Probably our best advice to our former selves and other, you know, would-be founders, and, you know, keep the implementation and the buzzwords to like slide 5 or 6 in your pitch decks.
Right.
Yeah. No, it's actually funny that you say that, because, you know, I fundraised for a company, and I had a slide at the very end that talked about blockchain, Bitcoin and cryptocurrency and how we think about it. And we leave it in the deck for some investors and we take it out for others, right? Like, it just, there's no point in having a conversation about that with someone that just doesn't see it. You're like, why create it? But there are some that really want to see it, right? Like they see that vision. So when, you know, going, or did you want to say something, Tim? Sorry.
I was just going to say, you know, one of the things that COVID also made more challenging here, right, is that anything which is disruptive, maybe more future forward, you know, kind of the bigger that innovative gap or stretch is that a startup's idea contains, the harder that gets when the macroeconomic climate, gets
Yep.
more challenging, as it suddenly has here. And so that was obviously a big piece of our, we were raising right in the midst of all of that. As VCs suddenly were huddling down around their existing portfolios. So
Yeah.
it definitely made that, that I think that's always a challenging pitch when a founder wants to do something that's maybe, a little further afield and not evolutionary. So
Yeah.
the further you want to go there, I think the harder that is. One of the nice things about NeoTribe was they absolutely absolutely got that. And so we were very lucky that our lead investor was very like-minded, very excited and inspired by innovation and the idea of doing something disruptive, even if it means we may not be well understood for the first the first year.
Yeah, they're giving you that path and that runway and that confidence that they have in you, basically. So, last question I want to kind of touch on in regards to this fundraising overall is, so this is your first funding round that you've raised for this company, correct? So, for those that are founders that are listening, why did you approach venture capital for this as opposed to, say, angel investors, or do a small round or do a small seed round? I mean, it seems obvious because there's probably a lot going on with what you have to do, but I'm just curious, like what was the thought process and how you targeted your investors, size and so forth?
Yeah, Shruthi, do you want to provide a little color on that?
Look, this is a new category that we're creating, and there's an educational component to it in addition to your traditional top-down and bottoms-up sales motion with this technology, and this platform and framework essentially. There is also the market we're approaching has been burned a little bit by a lot of this enterprise blockchains or the alternatives, which is point-to-point API, which worked when the data wasn't as prevalent as it is today. I mean, there were no IoT and edge devices producing massive amounts of data even 5 years ago as it is now. So APIs become very inflexible, and that's really the majority of the alternatives that is available. So the educational component is one, the developer education that was needed, and the second one was the customer education that was needed of where directionally where we're headed to as a market. So given these two, we needed this runway, not only in terms of funding runway, but also the type and quality of people that would be together with us in this journey that carried us for 2-3 years before we could make meaningful difference. Think of Lambda days. Tim launched Lambda in 2014, and I came into Lambda in 2017, and it took quite a bit, even though this was an AWS service launched by, Tim did quite a bit of work evangelizing Lambda. For it to be understood, it took a little bit of a time. Now, we're not AWS, we're a startup, and we're attempting to do that similar motion here, but albeit with a problem that is very prevalent right now. So it's really bleeding at the jugular vein, so to speak. It's not a vitamin, it's not a nice to have.
Yeah.
For that, we needed the support and a framework around us of folks who've done this before, who've seen many other companies who've done this before, and have that market support capability within them. So that's one of the reasons we sought out the folks, the investors we did, NeoTribe, Correlation, Westwave, Hammer, Winblad, Floodgate, Future Perfect. All of these folks have our enterprise core infrastructure, deep tech VCs who have been founders themselves. They've built ecosystems before. They've scaled companies. Most of them have done IPOs before, and they know how it is to be a founder. They've been operators before. So that was the funding is great, so we can go hire the right folks. But the support we get from these folks here, that's one of the reasons we went and sought these guys out.
Yeah, your company doesn't strike me as one that you can, hire a bunch of junior devs and give them a bunch of stock and pizza and just hope they can figure it out.
Yeah.
I'm assuming.
And we should also say we're hiring. So
we are hiring.
Get that message in. Yeah. Look, core backend developers, solution architects, full stack engineers. But yeah, as Shruti said, like we've got the classic challenges here of selling to the enterprise with the enterprise sales cycle, coupled with a multi-party aspect, right? Because in some of these cases, it will be multiple companies, right, who are doing that, and then it's all in the macro environment in which obviously sort of a lot of the world kind of economy has been suddenly disrupted in this fairly extensive fashion. Sometimes that can help, sometimes that can hurt. But all of that put together, when we thought about this strategically, we said, what I guess come to be called in the VC parlance a mango seed was kind of the right size for us, so that we can build a team and have enough runway to go tackle that challenge. And then by the time we get to our A round investors, we'll have had the opportunity to demonstrate the kind of traction, engagement, and and selling strategies, as well as obviously the product market fit by then. That'll help us get to that next level of funding.
Makes sense, totally. So going back to the product for a second, I can't remember who, but one of you was mentioning how you think of yourselves as the plumbing, kind of that interstitial product. So in that regard, are you looking for companies to use you as infrastructure for how they start to transfer that data and think through, whether that be blockchain or not, but just how they're managing and migrating the data information?
Yeah, I mean, I can, I'll give you my flavor of that, and then I think Shruti has obviously spent a lot of time thinking through this as well. From a kind of a product and engineering perspective, there's really several different ways that we think customers can engage with this. One is as an application, so you'll think basically track and trace. Parts, supplies, manufactured goods, whatever it is. Deciding, for example, or being able to track, which parts went into which car. So when it comes time for a warranty recall, for example, you know whether or not the right car needs to be recalled as part of a particular program. So that's kind of the application space, and we call that Vendia Share. That's our kind of ready to go, out of the box, provides value as a business application, especially to folks who have this type of track and trace challenge, be that IoT integration, mobile integration, kind of lots of different ways in which it presents itself to the enterprise. There's another version of this which is more straight up infrastructure play, which we think of as the Vendia Virtual Data Lake. It's I need to get my data together so that I can go take action on it. Maybe that action is run an ML trainer on it so that I can get some value out of an AI program. So we think that is kind of the most infrastructure centric piece of it. And then there are opportunities here and partners that we've engaged, which look more like shrink wrap or OEM kinds of experiences, where somebody is using us literally as the plumbing. They want to build something else. Maybe they want to build their own version of an application or data transfer, or build a different kind of blockchain experience. And we just happen to be sort of an efficient, useful implementation for that strategy. So that's a little bit of an engineering centric answer. Shruti, maybe you want to kind of put that in some more business and go-to-market terms, though.
Yeah. So let me start with the plumbing perspective. There are quite a few, and Jonathan, you've heard, know a lot of these folks who do application layer, business logic layer, multi-party blockchain type solutions. So the land registry, smart mobility using traffic cameras and sensing, autonomous vehicles, all of these DeFi, decentralized finance and things like that, where what they need is they're trying to either hook up something on AWS, on EC2s, on Hyperledger Fabric framework, or they're using Ethereum private implementation, DIY type solutions. All of these server-based solutions, which are forever on, that cost them a lot of money, takes them 3 to 4 months to just set up a network. And every time they add a new participant or a new customer, the network just explodes because you have to scale them exponentially. It's an n factorial problem at this point. So these are the type of companies. In fact, the latest company that we're talking to is in the smart mobility space. They track your GPS data, the weather data, the signal data from the city, and then correlate that in an accident, and then inform the insurance company what is the probability of fault of your particular car versus the car that you had an accident with, let's say. So, and then they make claim adjustment process. Now, this company is very good at creating the business logic layer. What they don't want to be in the business of is creating the infrastructure or the platform layer, because that's undifferentiated work for them. And that's what we're really good at, in creating a platform service. So it's very easy for them to just build what their core competency, stack it on top of our offering, make endpoint connections, and bam, you're off to the races. It's as easy as that. It's a few days at best with an integration type of an engineer, as opposed to 3 months, juicing up your own network, setting up all of the systems and paying for servers, only to find out that you got the wrong configuration and you start all over. So it just reduces the barrier to entry for a new type of a company to be formed.
Yeah. So real quick, because that makes sense to me. Break that down for someone like, for example, with how like onboarding works, like OAuth, right? Like something that people like really understand, because basically it sounds like what you're saying is that, if I'm a software engineer, I could build this all out on my own for my team, but one, I have to have the expertise in it. And two, I have to know that I'm connecting it all. And then after, several months of, operating that with my team to build it, and then going off of whatever our core competency actually is, then I may have what I need, but it's probably not going to be ready. Right. That sounds like there's a lot of softwares that, people use, for example, for just spinning up a website, right? It's like, sure, you can code your own HTML website if you wanted to. But nowadays you can just use Wix, for example, or you can use WordPress, and you can use kind of like these easier things. And if you really wanted to build a website from scratch, you could. It's just going to take you a lot more time than maybe is worth if that's not your core competency.
Exactly. And think about this. If you go, let's say you want to go build a database table, right? But for a single company, for a single account, right? For a single tech stack, for a single user, you walk up to that. You issue a create table statement. You don't need to know how to code. You don't have to hire a team. All you need to know is your data model. Right? A few minutes later, you have a production grade table, but it's a centralized table, right? For a single user, for a single account. India works exactly the same way. You walk up to it with a schema, in our case, a JSON schema. So somebody has to know the data model. They don't necessarily have to know how to code or have a coding team for all of that. They give us that schema, and then a few minutes later, they get a database table, only now that database is cross-cloud, cross-account, cross-company, and cross-technology stack. So it's that same kind of ease of use, that same kind of simple experience, only we've built in the decentralization capability that has been lacking from these kind of classic centralized approaches for it. But as easy and simple and as straightforward as if you were, going and creating yourself an Oracle database to use.
Makes sense.
If you step back to this, to what Tim said, really there are 4 steps, just 4 steps to this. One is you come up with your schema. Tim was talking about. This is a domain specific schema. You can really define anything just like you would in creating a database. So for the smart mobility platform, they would come up with, these are my data sources. These are my, this is the data types that we use. What happens if one thing, it's the definition of a smart contract framework there. So you bring us a schema. Here we support JSON schema today, but we support all schemas by early next year. You take that schema, you run it through Vendia. And 3 minutes later, you come up with this multi-party applications. All you need to do is, what are the accounts and what clouds you need to connect with? So if someone is not on a cloud, you can host that node for them. Now, hosting the node is not complicated, because that node is not forever on. So if this is some kind of a traffic data that cannot support a node, then you're running it on their behalf. It only turns on when that you need to ingest that traffic data. And once you ingest that traffic data, maybe a few milliseconds, and then it dies. And then there's no billing from that. And then the last one is we have automatic connectors to web and mobile APIs. So 4 steps, really, it's as simple as using WordPress, and you can use any language, any language that you use Lambda with, you can use today. So you don't need to learn anything new. You don't need to use any new databases, any new infrastructure, you use everything that you have. It's just one line of code and you're off to the races. It takes about 3.5 minutes to generate this.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, before we wrap up, I want to end with some questions just about what's happening, how in the world of technology, how we think of data overall. You know, it's been over the last, call it even 5 years, and it's exponentially more. The consumer's understanding and relationship to their data has increased, right? Like maybe 5 years ago, people didn't even realize as much about how valuable their data is or how their data is used. And then you have things like the Facebook Analytica, or Cambridge Analytica fiasco a few years ago. And now what's in the news is like TikTok, for example, with like TikTok and using data. You know, what are your thoughts about how the relationship with data has just changed at the consumer end? And then how do you see that just continuing to evolve, you know, in the near future?
Yeah, you know, I think the trend lines here are all creating just additional complexity for the enterprise. You know, more and more data is getting produced, more and more data is getting consumed. That's kind of obvious. We all know that. But the subtlety there, I think, as you point out, is that much of that data is, you know, what we call PII, personally identifiable information. And it's increasingly subject to, you know, to government regulations. GDPR is a well-known one in Europe, but now California and other parts of the US have the same challenge. And so both complying with those, you know, with those regulations, if you're an enterprise, you know, and as a user and consumer of what those enterprises are producing, as someone who kind of, you know, walks up to the internet every day and uses all of those products and services, that's going to be one of your chief concerns is, you know, is my data being used in an appropriate way? Do I have appropriate control of it? So as hard a job as this is for the enterprise, I think for, you know, for companies like Vendia, it's, you know, it's a rich vein of opportunity, because that requires an ever more fine-grained, ever more real-time, ever more kind of carefully governed data that relates to them. And if companies aren't willing to do that on their own, governments are going to force them to do it. So the bigger that problem becomes, and the more challenging it becomes, ledgers and blockchains, you know, to add value in the modern enterprise. So we're as these privacy concerns, you know, we're excited from a business opportunity perspective, you know, to be in a market that's helping to solve and address some of those challenges.
You know, I agree with Tim. Look, you said it, Jonathan, that I think users, consumers, us, we the people, we're finding out that what we put out there is important and we need to protect it. So we need some fine-grained controls over our own data. It could be community-led, it could be consortium-led, government-led, quasi-government, and the citizenry-led. Whatever it is, there needs to be some fine-grained control. And I think that innovation will come again from the technology that actually created the problem in the first place. It's a good problem to have. At the same time, it is causing a lot of pains to a lot of people. So tech will come up with this. But we also realized this, I think sometime last year when Tim and I talked about this space, was this problem needs to be solved. This data everywhere problem needs to be solved. And that whether it's for consumer focused or enterprise focused, this is a problem. Data everywhere. My data is everywhere. It's on multiple social channels, and that needs to be protected. And I need fine-grained control. So our hope for Vendia is that developers will come in and use what we've created as a baseline to create these applications that end up protecting the privacy of individual people like you and I, and the citizenship as a whole of this and other countries in the world. So to that end, we have a free preview. We will start ungating in the next couple of weeks here. We encourage all the developers to sign up. It's free. It's a multi-account on AWS. They can take and test drive it, experiment, create their own applications. And we're also hiring. So if you want to come work with us and create the future of dispersed data, we have a lot of jobs open on jobs.vendia.net, and we would love to have you and talk to you. So Yeah, let's work on this consumer and data protection problem for the future. Very excited.
Excellent. Well, one question I like to ask everybody as I close my show, and you two can decide who answers it, but what is a question that you have that you would like to ask our audience that they can think about as they go about their day?
I think one of the things we both think about all the time, and this was very true when we first started the serverless program at AWS. We discovered there was so much more that customers were able and willing to do with that. And so I think the perennial question for any of these platform innovations is, what else can we use it for? What are the interesting challenges, creative ideas, things like the one you were just talking about, consumer data protections that that perhaps we aren't working on or haven't even thought about that it could apply to. If you could get your data to every cloud and use all the best services of every cloud in an easy way without having to write any additional code, what could you do with that? And I think that's the question we would love to see answered, and certainly hope to play a role in answering.
Excellent. Fantastic. Well, thank you both for joining me. What are some good ways that people can follow you, stay in touch with you, get in touch with you?
Awesome. Our website is at vendia.net. That's www.vendia.net. We also have jobs.vendia.net, which is a great way to kind of learn about some of our open positions and hiring opportunities that we're doing there. You can follow us on Twitter at VendiaH, and I think we both of us on LinkedIn as well. So you can also follow us at a personal level or social media. Shruthi, did I miss any there?
Nope. Vendia on LinkedIn, we're at Vendia Unis. So,
Perfect.
and we
Awesome.
look forward to connecting with you.
And our blog is a blog on Medium. So go to medium.com/Vendia and you can read more about our stories. We've got a founder background and our kind of a welcome message on there. And we'll be posting some additional technical information and background as we get closer to our preview launch. So look forward to communicating with people through that.
Perfect. Well, again, Tim, Shruthi, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thanks, Jonathan. Great to be here.
Everybody, thank you for listening to another episode of the TF podcast. Please make sure that you like and subscribe and make sure that you are sharing with your friends and colleagues. It goes a long way to make sure that we get our great podcast in the hands of others. You can follow us at TFLabs_ and myself at JGProduct on Twitter, or just go to tflabs.io and you'll see all our past interviews, video and audio. Thanks so much, and we'll see y'all soon.